Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space on all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. Now, for those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Sunday. We actually have a thought piece scheduled to drop this upcoming Sunday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available on 12 different podcast platforms for your listening leisure, and we've provided you with access to the links in the description down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these discussions and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today our topic of discussion is mental health. On the conversation of mental health today, I think today and also in our next video this week, we're going to be focusing on kindness. I want to really deconstruct kindness because I do believe that we can have different working definitions of what it means to be kind and show up as being kind. And I want to talk about my journey in embracing kindness and also how kindness is an important tool to leverage across the board. So I think that a lot of the times we have like all these adages and these sayings around the word kindness, and a lot of the times kindness in and of itself can be misconstrued as niceness, and they're very different. And so I'm proud to say that I don't consider myself to be a nice person. I think most people who know me relatively well would say that I'm not like a nice person. It's not my top 5, my top 10, or my top 15 traits, and I'm like very happy about that. But I am a kind person. So I think people would say that I am kind, and the difference between being nice and being kind is that when you're kind, you keep yourself in mind. You're not out in the world hoping to gain validation and to gain approval from other people, and I think that that's what makes being nice a little bit dangerous. And I say a little bit dangerous, I mean a lot dangerous. And I want to talk a little bit about my journey towards embracing kindness as a tool and as a mechanism that I leverage to really support my own ability to preserve myself and to maintain my safety, as well as to ensure that when it is the case that I'm showing up in different spaces, that I'm giving myself space to respond and to react appropriately. And I think that kindness is a tool that enables us to leverage self-mastery. And I think that people who are kind are people who are masters of their emotions. Kindness in and of itself lives on the spectrum between someone who's really nice and who seeks approval in everything they do, even the things that end up being to their detriment or really for the sake of getting approval and getting acknowledgement from the world around them. Hostility is really trying to do the opposite, right? Really trying to keep yourself safe. there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of powerlessness in hostility in some of the ways that it presents itself, right? And that this is really like true hostility, not hostility being used as an instrument. And some people have learned to leverage hostility as an instrument, and that's a very different conversation. But I think kindness is somewhere in between, where we recognize when and to what extent it's appropriate to show up in spaces seeking to build connections, to build relationships, but not overextending ourselves in order to do so. At the end of the day, people choose who they like and who they don't like. And when you're operating from a place of kindness, comfortable with whatever choices they make, right? You're just trying to put yourself in a situation where, maybe you can have an experience that's great, but you also want to keep yourself away from those experiences that are not the best for anybody. And someone who's showing up more hostile is more insecure about whether or not these interactions are going to be harmful or helpful. And so they show up as hostile because they'd rather protect themselves preemptively out of the gate. Whereas kindness, as you think about, on that spectrum between hostility and kindness, now we're moving away from like kindness and niceness and being nice, we're moving towards kindness and hostility. It's where like, even if I am presented with hostility or I'm presented with passive aggression or with overt aggression, I can still choose to operate and to respond from a place of kindness while still setting the tone and establishing boundaries as to, how far this interaction is going to continue. And at what point am I going to extract myself without losing my head, without losing my cool? And that's where I feel like kindness is this really important tool that we all need to learn to leverage and to really operate from in order to allow the situation and the environment to indicate to us how best to follow through. And so I've learned kindness over time, right? It is definitely a way of being that I have become better at managing and supporting myself with maturity, with time, and with experience. And I'll say that, I've talked a little bit about who, the kind of human I was as a child, and I would consider myself to be a free-spirited woman, but first I was a wild child. And I would hear a lot growing up, you catch more with honey than you do with vinegar. And if I heard that a lot, it was because I was using a lot of vinegar, right? I was comfortable being hostile if it was the case that I felt my boundaries were being breached or I wasn't in a safe situation or a safe setting. And actually being a female, being a visible minority, and also being very small and very petite, the sense of insecurity that I had was justified. I don't think it was perception-based. I think that in a lot of the times, especially once I hit puberty, I was in settings where I was constantly feeling like I was under threat. And I think that as a woman, as someone who really didn't understand my femininity, didn't understand the attention that I was getting, didn't really have conversations around sexuality and how there's this transition that's very confusing for a lot of adolescents around sexuality. And growing up in a very rural area, there was a high degree of aggression towards women in my high school, and I'm using like fairly soft language. The setting that we were in, a lot of the violence that was really taking place was like violence against women. There's a lot of bad things happening to women, and I think that it was one of those things where, because there's this confusion around sexuality and it was very hush-hushed and not a lot of people were actually talking about it and providing clarity on it, women, I think, or girls at that time, because I was in high school, we fell into one of two categories, right? So we would fall into the category of being either promiscuous, and being promiscuous was someone who you could be nice and immediately you were promiscuous. You could show up as any which way, but if it was perceived to any extent as being inviting, then immediately you were very readily tagged as promiscuous, and then you were a target. And the other one was the B word, right? So you were either one of those things, or either the B word or you were promiscuous. And I saw really quickly the amount of attention that I was gaining, and I was a late bloomer, so I have to say that I was late to the quick, right? I was garnishing attention before I really understood what it meant, before I really understood to what extent it was informing the way that I was responding in the world around me. But when you're in a scenario where I think the male to female ratio, there is more men than there are women, there's a lot of, confusion and aggression around sexuality. I think the way that women were categorized when I was in high school was specifically to demarcate like who was prey and who was, off limits. And the only way that you were off limits, and even, some people were still bold enough to try, was if you were the B word. And if you were anything else, like a very few women, I believe, like left my high school unscathed. And I think that that's a really sad truth and a sad reality that I haven't really spoken too much on here. But I think that, it really does impact your mental health when you're constantly in this state of fight or flight. And reasonably understandably so, because you're in an environment that is fairly hostile towards you because of who you are and how you present, and because of the attention that you're gaining, right? And the attention that I was gaining, I didn't fully understand because one, I was very sheltered. I didn't have many conversations that would give me periphery on what it was that I was experiencing. And two, I was also like fairly ignorant, right? So I was fairly ignorant even to some of the language that was being used pertaining to me. I was fairly ignorant about, all of the different ways that I could trigger a response. I was ignorant as to the power, and I think that that's the only really word I can use. So there's a certain power when you have that kind of attention, right? And I think that I was learning on the ground, and I think that when you don't have peripheral information, every lesson can really go one of the ways. It can go really well or really poorly, but I was learning very quickly that it was to my benefit to learn to always respond with kindness, right? So I think that with kindness, my kindness is measured in that I'm always responding in a way where I'm not seeking to invite further attention, but not antagonize either. So I've learned to really balance this line between not inviting further attention, but not antagonizing. I've tilted on either or of that scale, and it creates a lot of really serious discomfort, and I think very harmful situations that I'm happy that I got myself out of. But I recognize that when you're in a society where it is still very patriarchal, there's still a lot of undertones of aggression towards women that translates in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different biases and beliefs that are at play when it comes to how people respond to you, regardless of where they are on that spectrum. But if you add desirability to it, right? If you add a layer of desirability, then you need to just be mindful that desirability can translate in a lot of different ways depending on how it is that you respond. So I've learned that kindness is the best way to respond, so that I have an opportunity to get a sense as to the relay and what direction it can take, and then pivot myself accordingly. And so that's what I learned to do, and that's what I do in my professional life. But I think that people really just need to understand that kindness is a position of strength, is a position of self-control and self-mastery. You have to really be the master of yourself to respond with kindness in every situation. And my first response to everything, even if I feel like I'm dealing with a really hostile situation and the situation is escalating, if there's an argument, I will always respond with kindness first, because my focus is on self-preservation. My focus is on making sure that this interaction, it doesn't go left, right? And I found that with kindness, I can respond with kindness, get further clarity, and manage hostility, right? So I think that when someone is rejected, or when someone feels like they're not getting what they want, and they feel resentful that they have to ask permission, or they feel resentful that you're not, bending to what it is they're looking for, then that can go left very quickly. It is important that I first gauge to what extent this could be, something that escalates in a way where it's just maybe an argument. Is it going to escalate where, the best response, once I get a sense as to, okay, this is definitely veering on the side of hostility, so I'll respond with silence. And a lot of the times when I do recognize that things aren't really going to go well, or this is an erosion, like this relationship is eroding, or, things are kind of falling by the wayside, then I usually will just disengage. And that's the best way of dealing with it and protecting my peace. And typically when you disengage from someone, when you limit access and remove yourself from them, then not having access to you, and that allows them to divert their attention elsewhere. And it has worked 80% of the time, 80 to 85% of the time, I will say. In other cases, disengaging isn't really the best response. You have to respond. So you have to respond, but I think when responding with kindness, you can always support in diffusing the situation, right? I think matching hostility with hostility can really have a situation escalate really left really quickly. And I'm always focused on self-preservation, and I'm making sure that I am relatively okay. And so I'll choose with kindness in that situation as well if it becomes verbal. But where the hostility becomes physical, I can now pivot my kindness and translate the way the situation requires me to translate for me to preserve my sense of self. And so I think that that's the difference between kindness and being nice, because being nice, you're still focused on gaining that approval and getting that attention, that even when the situation shifts and now you're not okay, you're in a dangerous situation, you've been targeted for some degree of violence, and violence for me is on a spectrum, right? It can be hostility by relational aggression, it could be verbal aggression, or it can be physical aggression. But I think that I can match aggression up to verbal aggression with kindness, because I think that that's the best way to diffuse the situation and to maintain a certain level of safety, of perceptual safety. But kindness is not the right response if you're dealing now with like an escalation that might lead to physical violence, right? And I think that people who suffer with being nice all the time often find that they don't necessarily have the appropriate tools to deal with a situation that is now escalating towards violence. And I think also if you're responding always from a place of hostility, the situation can escalate to physical violence more quickly than that I think that one can be ready for. And as a byproduct of that, you're not necessarily putting yourself or creating enough distance and space to ensure that it doesn't escalate to the point of physical violence. And I think that kindness is the between that enables self-preservation, that enables you to respond with yourself and even with the other person in mind to make sure that you're helping the both of you regulate in that conversation. And I think that that's what makes kindness really very powerful. And I think operating from a place of kindness is supportive to our mental health. It means that we're not always feeling like we're at a disadvantage because people don't like us, they don't approve of us and we have to fight for that approval. We're at a disadvantage because we feel the world is against us, right? So I think even choosing kindness in all cases, it means you're choosing yourself first, right? It means you're operating with yourself in mind and you're okay to address the situation the way the situation requires, but always focusing on diffusing it first, right? So I'm always focused on diffusing a situation. I never care for a situation to escalate, and kindness is the way that I manage that. And I think kindness is a tool that I've needed to learn very early on in my life because I am female, because I am, a visible minority, and also because I'm very petite. I think we would love to live in a reality where, our physical characteristics have nothing to do with the way that we need to show up in the world, but I don't think we're there yet. And I definitely live in a reality where preserving my mental health, making sure that I can ensure or I can create a sense of safety in the spaces that I go into with the attention that I attract, consciously or unconsciously. I've learned that kindness is the best way of also giving myself the opportunity and the time to best gauge the move forward. And so I wanted to have this conversation today because I think that a lot of the times the way that we present and the way that we choose to present is far removed from the conversation of mental health. And we don't think about how it is that we choose to show up in the spaces that we're in that are creating, maybe a cycle of destruction where it's like, okay, like it doesn't matter who the people are, like I'm still, dealing with the same kinds of interactions and the same kinds of engagements, and I'm dealing with the same story, but different players. And I think that it is the way that we present, the way that we choose to present in different situations, taking the lessons and the learnings that we've had from previous experiences that will better support ourselves in creating environments that are good for us and that serve us. And I think that depending on who you are and how that translates in the societies that you're in, kindness is the tool to leverage to support that for you. And I think that as a female, and I typically, have worked or I'm in spaces that are fairly male dominated, I think that a lot of the times desirability and attraction, it dehumanizes, right? And I think we've done some studies around this where attraction sometimes, how it translates is objectifying. There's an objectifying quality to attraction. You want to do what you can to ensure that your humanity is constantly perceived without attracting further attention. And I find like that's been a difficult balancing act. And I've learned that kindness is really the best way for me to ensure that I'm always moving forward in a way where I'm giving myself the opportunity to have great experiences, but not inviting more attention that I'm not looking for, but also situating myself so that I'm not antagonizing attention that can turn ugly, because we never know how things go when it comes to attention and what happens when our response to that attention is no. So always operate, I think, from a place of kindness. I think that it's supportive to you. It's more helpful to you than you realize to put your best foot forward in those situations, though to assume that someone who is being kind is weak is very misguided. I think that there's a difference between kindness and being nice. I think I am a very kind person. It is because I'm very intentional about being a kind person. It is a choice I make actively on a daily basis because I recognize that it's the best way for me to get the most out of this world while protecting myself the most that I absolutely can. And I think a lot of the times when people see that I really do make a point of being kind and they misperceive that as weakness, when they recognize that the next step forward, when it is the case that I'm dealing with varying degrees of hostility, is a lot of the times disengaging. It's like like going silent is like, okay, this isn't an interaction I need to continue. These aren't relationships I need to continue. Then they start to recognize, well, no, actually kindness was a position of strength. It was a position of standing tall, standing strong, being anchored and confident and self-assured about the value that I bring, about the human that I am, and also recognize that I can withdraw myself without needing to withdraw kindness. I can just withdraw myself from that setting or the situation that I feel is detrimental. And I think that that's a tool that everyone should leverage because it supports you, it protects you, and it enables you to engage and to socialize and to gain new experiences without exposing yourself to potential harm, which exists, right? It exists, and just by the nature of who you are and how you present, you attract it by varying degrees, unbeknownst to you and not by any fault of your own, but always operate from a place of awareness and from mindfulness, and I promise you, you can mitigate a lot of what it is that could potentially be headed your way. Not everything, of course, but a lot of it, and I find that operating with kindness has enabled me to diffuse so many situations that could have escalated further, but also disengage from situations that wouldn't have served me regardless, right? I think seeking approval, seeking validation in spaces where you don't belong, at tables where you don't have a seat, is unnecessary. I have never felt any desire to be in a space where I am not wanted or to be a part of a situation that doesn't keep me in mind. That's never been who I was, and I'm very comfortable in, pivoting and realigning as is appropriate. So I do think that it's important that people recognize kindness and the power that exists and that you can harness within kindness and dealing with, again, hostility or dealing with social settings, and how you really show up putting your best foot forward, but keeping yourself in mind. In any case, that was the conversation for today, but definitely not all. Now, before letting you go, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we will be going live at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our Facebook page. So definitely be sure to tune in. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. Yes, so we do offer package plans over and above our live events, as well as access to webinars and workshops, largely focused on self-mastery over and above these events. So we do hope that you tune in, be part of our game changer community, being the change that you want to see, allowing us a small role to play in your journey. So we are on the road to 1K. We definitely invite you to give us a follow, leave a like, and we look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.